I remember the exact moment the silence changed. It was not the absence of sound, space has always been quiet, but the absence of pressure. As if something once watching us had blinked away. The fleet drifted through the outer void beyond known charts, a region forgotten by nav beacons and distant from Imperial authority. Our scanners reported nothing. Unusual, cold rocks, dead stars, the usual graveyard of the cosmos. Yet the astropaths fell silent mid-chant, their eyes open but unfocused, as though the psychic currents they once navigated had dried up. No screams followed, no demonic whispers, only emptiness. The navigators reported that the currents of the immaterium, those turbulent tides of thought and emotion, were strangely still, not hostile, not boiling, still like water frozen mid-motion for beings raised to survive the warp's madness. Such stillness felt more unnatural than any storm. I watched the hololithic display aboard the command deck as our position updated, and there it was. A metallic structure drifting near a dead star, rotating slowly, its geometry wrong for any known human design. No aquillas, no mechanicus sigils, only scars-etched symbols that resembled mathematical equations and ritual markings, simultaneously, as if logic and superstition had been welded together. The vessel was ancient, older than our records, and yet it remained intact, its hull glowing faintly with an inner pulse. The name burned into the metal in corrupted high. Gothic read, Event Horizon. It meant nothing and everything, a threshold, a boundary, something that should not exist. The Magos Dominus ordered scans, but the results were inconsistent. Gravity readings fluctuated. Mass calculations defied reason, and internal structure maps revealed corridors that folded back on themselves like impossible knots. No distress signals, no life signs, only the steady rhythm of that inner pulse. I felt a tightening in my chest, a recognition that was not knowledge but intuition. We were looking at something that had crossed dimensions humanity was never meant to explore. The warp remained silent. The psychic background noise that usually accompanies all thought had vanished, leaving a vacuum where sensation once lived. It was not liberation, it was loss. As we prepared boarding protocols, I considered the implications. If the immaterium, the sea of souls, could be stilled, what happened to the currents that sustain belief? To the energies that empower gods and monsters alike? In the grim darkness of our universe, survival has always required adaptation to horror, but this was different. This was absence, a correction rather than an invasion. I stepped onto the boarding cutter with the other operatives, boots striking the derelict's airlock with metallic echoes. The door yielded without resistance. Inside, the air was breathable yet stale, carrying a scent of iron and something older, an aroma that triggered memories I did not possess. The corridors were vast, cathedral-like, yet devoid of iconography. No human prayers, no Xenos markings, only the same geometric scars as the exterior, patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. Red lumens pulsed along the walls, not from standard lighting but from conduits embedded within the structure itself, veins of energy throbbing like a heartbeat. I told myself it was imagination. Ships age, metal expands and contracts. But deep down I understood the truth. This vessel was alive in its own way, not with flesh, not with consciousness as we define it, with purpose. We advanced toward the core, guided by instruments that struggled to interpret the readings. The further we went, the more the geometry of the ship resisted comprehension. Distances felt wrong, corridors that should have ended continued indefinitely, while others looped back upon themselves. Time became subjective, minutes stretched, thoughts grew quieter. I realized the silence had followed us inside. The immaterium ones, a storm of psychic sensation, remained absent. No demonic presence, no oppressive pressure, only stillness. For the first time in my career, I felt exposed. Not to violence, not to corruption, to meaninglessness. What does a warrior fight when there is nothing to fight? What does faith protect when the currents of belief themselves falter? I glanced at the Magos. His mechadendrites twitched, interfacing with alien ports despite protocol. He whispered binharic hymns, not in defiance but in curiosity. The machine spirit of the vessel responded not with data, but with resonance. A subtle vibration traveled through the metal, harmonizing with his codicants. It was not communication, it was alignment. I wanted to shout at him to stop, to seal the core and return to the fleet, but something prevented me. A quiet certainty that resistance was irrelevant. The pulse of the sphere ahead of Usif, it was a sphere, continued, steady, patient, measuring. In the 41st millennium, humanity has faced demons, Xenos, and heresy. We understand war, we understand suffering, but understanding is different. Understanding implies order, logic, a framework within which phenomena can be analyzed. This vessel defied that framework. It existed outside our assumptions. I realized then that the greatest danger was not what we might find inside. It was what we might become by confronting it. Transformation, equilibrium, a universe without the extremes that define us. If Chapter 1 marks arrival, it also marks the first question. What remains when the familiar rules no longer apply? I recorded this log because history demands witnesses, not heroes, not prophets, witnesses. For in the grim darkness of our reality, truth is silence is the most dangerous answer of all. The second day began without incident. No alarms, no reports of intrusion, no psychic disturbances. The fleet maintained standard operations, and for a brief time, I allowed myself to believe that the anomaly was nothing more than an abandoned relic, an archaeological curiosity drifting in the void. Such thoughts are dangerous. The Imperium trains its servants to distrust comfort. Survival in the 41st millennium requires vigilance, and yet the absence of threat had a corrosive effect. Crew members spoke less, not out of fear, but disinterest. Conversations that once carried urgency now faded quickly, replaced by mechanical acknowledgements and brief nods. The astropaths remained silent, their choirs reduced to hushed rituals that lacked emotional intensity. I watched them during observation, Round's eyes open, lips moving, but no psychic resonance accompanied their prayers. It was as if the language of the warp had lost meaning, not hostility, not rejection, meaninglessness. Reports from the derelict vessel confirmed continued stability. The boarding teams established perimeter stations within the outer corridors, documenting structural anomalies and cataloging geometric markings. Data logs described patterns that shifted subtly when recorded symbols that appeared static to the naked eye but rearranged themselves under magnification, forming new configurations that defied conventional interpretation. The Mechanicus interpreted this as advanced engineering, evidence of a civilization that manipulated space through principles beyond human comprehension. I interpreted it as warning. Technology is neutral, intent is not. A weapon remains a weapon regardless of its age or origin. The event horizon, if that was truly its name, had not revealed itself through violence. It existed, that was enough. The warp remained still. This detail should have brought relief. The Immaterium is a realm of madness, a psychic sea that devours the weak and empowers the corrupt. Its silence ought to signify safety, yet every sanctioned psyker aboard the fleet reported the same sensation. Absence, the currents they once navigated had thinned, becoming shallow and unreliable. Attempts at astral communication produced fragmented messages, distorted echoes that arrived without emotional context. It is quiet, one astropath repeated, eyes unfocused. Too quiet. He could not explain what that meant. I understood nonetheless. Humans define existence through contrast. Light and dark, war and peace, faith and doubt. Remove the extremes and understanding falters. The silence was not benign, it was redefinition. Inquisitor Halbricht convened a briefing within the Strategium. Her expression remained severe, but I detected subtle tension around her ease, a sign of unease she would never acknowledge publicly. The Mechanicus presented updated projections. The distortion field surrounding the derelict vessel had expanded by fractional margins, not enough to threaten immediate systems, not enough to trigger panic, but measurable growth. Equilibrium propagating outward like ripples in still water. The implications were clear. If the phenomenon continued, the Immaterium's influence would diminish across adjacent sectors. Warp travel would become unreliable. Astropathic communication would degrade. The Imperium's infrastructure built upon psychic interconnectivity would weaken. For 10,000 years, humanity has survived through adaptation to chaos. Remove chaos, and we face a different challenge. Some within the Council argued for immediate destruction of the anomaly. Exterminators' protocols were discussed in hushed tones. Orbital bombardment, virus bombs, total eradication. Halbricht listened without interruption, then dismissed the suggestion. The vessel existed beyond conventional targeting parameters. Its core resisted mass, reactive weaponry, gravity distortions, disrupted precision strikes. To destroy it would require methods we did not possess. More importantly, destruction would not address the underlying phenomenon. If the distortion represented a fundamental shift in reality, violence would be meaningless. I recorded her words with professional detachment, yet they lingered in my thoughts. The Imperium teaches that threats must be met with force. But what if force cannot solve the problem? What if the problem is conceptual? The second significant event occurred during routine monitoring of the fleet's psychers. One individual, a minor astropath assigned to communications relay, reported spontaneous emotional clarity. She described the sensation as release. as though burdens she had carried for years had suddenly vanished. Her psychic output diminished but did not collapse entirely. Instead, it stabilized at lower levels. The Mechanicus recorded this as anomaly. I recorded it as symptom. The warp stillness was altering human consciousness. Not through possession, not through corruption, through subtraction, extremes fading, emotional intensity decreasing. A civilization built upon passion and belief, confronting a world that no longer rewarded such traits. In the grim darkness of our universe, strength arises from suffering. Remove suffering, and the definition of strength changes. I visited the astropath afterward. She sat in a quiet chamber, hands folded, expression serene. When I asked about her condition, she answered with surprising honesty, "It is easier to think. No hallucinations, no demonic whispers, no psychic overload, simplicity." I expected relief, yet I felt unease. The Imperium depends on the talents of psychers despite the risks they pose. If those talents fade, so too does our ability to communicate across the stars. Humanity becomes isolated worlds cut off from guidance, supply lines severed, governance fractured. The silence that once threatened individual minds now threatens civilization. Not with war, with disconnection. Meanwhile, the event horizon continued its transformation. Structural scans revealed additional geometric growths along the interior, corridors, crystalline formations that mirrored the patterns observed in the core chamber. These structures were not random. They followed mathematical ratios, expanding in fractal arrangements that suggested purpose. The Mechanicus celebrated this discovery, claiming evidence of superior design. I remained skeptical. Design implies intent. Intent implies understanding. What understanding could we attribute to something that behaved like gravity given awareness? Halbrecht authorized deeper exploration despite objections from several officers. Curiosity, like faith, can be dangerous, but ignorance is worse. During one such exploration, a team encountered an area of the ship that had not existed in previous surveys. A corridor where data predicted solid bulkhead. The structure had reconfigured itself, creating new passage. No mechanical movement, no audible shifts, simply alteration. The team reported a sensation of weight, subtle pressure against their chests, as though space itself had become denser. They continued forward and documented additional rooms, none of which matched original schematics. The vessel was changing. Not rapidly, not violently, but undeniably. I reviewed the reports multiple times, searching for errors. There were none. Reality was adjusting. I find myself returning to the question that haunts every entry in this record. What is Paimon? The term originated from archaic mythologies describing entities of knowledge and obedience, spirits bound by ritual. Such interpretations are insufficient. The phenomenon we face exhibits characteristics of consciousness, responsiveness, adaptation, but lacks emotional signature. It does not rage like chaos. It does not scheme like the Necrons. It observes and recalibrates equilibrium. In a universe defined by imbalance, equilibrium is revolutionary. Yet revolution carries cost. The warp's stillness deprives psychers of their gifts. The Imperium's communication networks weaken. Human passion diminishes. Civilization built upon extremes must adapt or perish. Halbrecht addressed the fleet in a rare broadcast. Her voice remained steady. "We are witnesses," she said. "Not conquerors, not victims, witnesses." The statement sparked debate among officers and crew. Some interpreted it as surrender, others as wisdom. I understood it differently. Witnessing implies responsibility, to record, to remember, to provide context for those who come after. The Imperium values history, yet it also shapes history through ideology. This record resists ideology. It documents events as they occur. If the galaxy changes, our understanding must change with it. As I conclude this chapter, the distortion field continues to expand. Slowly, measurably, the warp remains quiet. Astropathic communication degrades in affected regions. Reports of demonic activity decline. Whether this represents victory or catastrophe remains uncertain. Humanity has survived by confronting horrors that defy comprehension. Perhaps this is simply another such horror, or perhaps it is opportunity, a chance to redefine existence without the perpetual threat of chaos. I cannot answer these questions. I can only record them. In the grim darkness of the far future, truth is rare, understanding rarer still, but silence is absolute. The third day arrived without fanfare, yet the absence of change itself became change. The fleet operated under routine protocols, and on the surface nothing differed from the day before. Reports filed, shifts rotated, engines maintained, but I sensed a subtle shift in atmosphere. a quiet dampening of urgency that permeated the crew. Conversations grew shorter, not out of hostility but disinterest, and even the most seasoned officers carried an air of contemplation, as though priorities, once held sacred, had lost their sharpness. The astropaths continued their silent rituals, eyes closed, lips moving without the psychic resonance that once accompanied their chants. And when I observed them, I noted the absence of strain or bleeding ears. No frantic scribbling of incomprehensible symbols, only stillness. It should have been reassuring, a sign that the warp's influence had receded, yet the stillness felt wrong, like a wound that no longer bled because the body had ceased to recognize injury. Reports from the distortion zone confirmed continued expansion, incremental and precise, the field extending further into surrounding space with mathematical regularity. No explosions, no invasions, no visible signs of aggression, just growth. The Mechanicus interpreted the phenomenon as evidence of superior design, a system recalibrating reality according to principles beyond human understanding, and they spoke of it with reverence rather than fear, describing the geometry of the expansion as proof of order where chaos once reigned. I remained unconvinced, for order without comprehension is indistinguishable from mystery, and mystery can be more dangerous than hostility. Inquisitor Halbricht maintained her resolve, enforcing containment protocols and monitoring the anomaly with disciplined vigilance, yet even she appeared affected by the atmosphere of quiet acceptance. Her orders remained firm, but the fervor that once underscored her directives had softened, replaced by pragmatic calculation. I recorded these observations with professional detachment, yet I cannot ignore the implications. Humanity is adapting, not through triumph or surrender, but through recalibration. Emotional extremes diminish, replaced by measured response. The warp's silence alters not only communication but consciousness, reducing volatility and heightening introspection. In another context, this might be progress, a step toward stability, but in the grim reality of our universe, stability carries risk. Civilizations built upon passion and belief require both to survive. Remove them, and what remains? Machines of governance, societies of efficiency, or something less, creatures of habit devoid of purpose. I visited the astropath again, curious about her earlier report of emotional clarity. She remained serene, describing her condition as relief, yet when I pressed for detail, she could not articulate the source of that relief. It was simply absence of psychic noise, absence of pressure, absence of the relentless echoes that once accompanied her existence. She described it as peace, but peace without meaning. I found myself troubled by her words, for the Imperium teaches that purpose arises from struggle, that faith is forged in adversity. If adversity fades, does purpose fade with it? The question is uncomfortable, bordering on heresy, yet I cannot dismiss it. The distortion field continued to alter the derelict vessel, introducing new geometric structures and reconfiguring internal corridors according to patterns that defied conventional engineering. Teams reported rooms that had not existed during previous surveys, spaces that appeared without mechanical explanation, their dimensions inconsistent with external schematics. These anomalies were documented, analyzed, and debated. Some within the Mechanicus celebrated them as evidence of advanced technology, while others urged caution, warning that understanding does not guarantee control. I agree with the latter perspective. Knowledge is valuable, but comprehension of a phenomenon does not grant mastery. The warp itself is understood to some degree, yet humanity remains vulnerable to its dangers. This new distortion presents a different challenge: abstraction rather than corruption. It removes rather than distorts, emotional intensity diminishes, communication falters, and systems dependent on psychic infrastructure weaken. The Imperium is vast, but vastness is not immunity. History records empires that collapsed not through invasion but stagnation. I fear we face a similar risk. Halbricht addressed the fleet once more, reiterating the importance of observation and documentation. Her tone remained steady, though I detected subtle fatigue and acknowledgement of complexity without resignation. She reminded us that witnesses carry responsibility, that understanding the present shapes the future. I find truth in her words. This record exists to inform, not to persuade, to describe events as they occur. If humanity changes, our understanding must change with it. The third day concludes. Without resolution, the distortion expands. The warp remains quiet, and the Imperium adapts. Whether adaptation signifies survival or transformation beyond recognition remains uncertain. In the grim darkness of the far future, certainty is rare, but observation endures. I will continue to record. The fourth day arrived with a subtle but undeniable shift in the fleet's atmosphere. Not a sudden catastrophe, but a gradual transformation that manifested in behavior and perception. Crew members performed their duties with competence, yet the urgency that once accompanied every order had softened, replaced by a quiet acceptance that bordered on detachment. Reports were filed, on-time maintenance schedules observed, but conversations lacked their former intensity. No arguments, no impassioned debates, only brief exchanges of information before returning to work. I noted this change across multiple departments, from engineering to logistics, and though no disciplinary issues arose, the uniformity of demeanor troubled me. Humans are creatures of extremes, capable of remarkable discipline, yet equally prone to passion. This fleet had always balanced those tendencies, channeling fervor into purpose. Now the balance seemed altered, not broken, but recalibrated. The astropaths continued their rituals, their chants reduced to whispers devoid of psychic resonance, and I observed them with growing unease. The absence of demonic interference should have been cause for celebration. No psychic backlash, no intrusive visions, no evidence of warp-based corruption, but the silence felt heavier than the storms we once endured. It was not the absence of threat that disturbed me, but the absence of context. In a universe defined by conflict, meaning arises from opposition. Without it, purpose becomes ambiguous. Reports from the distortion zone confirmed further expansion, incremental and methodical, the field extending across additional sectors with mathematical precision. No explosions, no invasions, no visible signs of aggression, just growth. The Mechanicus interpreted these findings through the lens of their doctrine, describing the phenomenon as evidence of superior order, a system optimizing reality according to principles beyond human comprehension. They spoke of geometry and equilibrium, of structures that predate conventional understanding. And though their enthusiasm bordered on reverence, I sensed uncertainty beneath their technical jargon. They understood the data, but not its implications. Knowledge without interpretation is insufficient. I revisited the astropath, seeking clarity regarding her earlier report of emotional relief. She remained composed, describing her condition as freedom from psychic noise. Yet when pressed for detail, she struggled to articulate the source of that freedom. It was not euphoria nor spiritual enlightenment, simply absence. Absence of pressure, absence of intrusion, absence of the constant echoes that once defined her existence. She described it as peace, but peace devoid of meaning. I found her words deeply unsettling. The Imperium teaches that purpose emerges from struggle, that faith is forged in adversity. If adversity diminishes, does purpose diminish as well? This question carries uncomfortable implications, bordering on philosophical territory discouraged by doctrine. Yet doctrine does not exempt reality from complexity. The distortion continued to alter the derelict vessel, introducing structural changes that defied conventional explanation. Teams reported new corridors and chambers appearing without mechanical intervention, spaces that lacked precedent in earlier surveys. These anomalies were documented and analyzed, with the Mechanicus proposing theories of advanced engineering and dimensional manipulation. Some celebrated the findings as validation of their beliefs, evidence of technology that transcends human limitations. Others urged caution, warning that understanding does not guarantee control. I concur with the latter perspective. History records civilizations that pursued knowledge beyond their capacity to comprehend, with disastrous consequences. The warp itself exemplifies this truth: an entity, partially understood, yet perpetually dangerous. This new phenomenon presents a different challenge. It does not corrupt or assault. It recalibrates. Emotional intensity diminishes, communication falters, and systems reliant on psychic infrastructure weaken. The Imperium is vast, but vastness offers no immunity. Stability can become stagnation, order can devolve into rigidity. I observe these trends with growing concern, recognizing parallels to historical patterns of decline. Empires fall not solely through external conflict, but internal erosion. The distortion's effects mirror such erosion, subtle and progressive. Halbricht maintains operational discipline, enforcing protocols and emphasizing documentation. Her leadership remains resolute, though I detect signs of fatigue and awareness of complexity without resignation. She reminds us that witnesses carry responsibility, that recording events preserves understanding for those who come after. I find truth in her assertion. This record exists to inform, not persuade, to describe phenomena as they occur. If humanity changes, our understanding must change accordingly. The fourth day concludes without decisive developments. Expansion continues, the warp remains quiet, and the fleet adapts. Adaptation may signify survival, but it may also herald transformation beyond. Recognition. In the grim reality of existence, certainty is rare, observation endures. I will continue to record. The fifth day arrived with a silence that felt heavier than the days before. Not oppressive in the manner of storms or conflict, but in its stillness. The fleet continued operations with disciplined efficiency reports processed, maintenance completed, watch rotations observed, but undercurrent of detachment persisted, subtle and pervasive. Conversations were brief, devoid of emotional urgency, and I noted that disagreements once common in matters of protocol had diminished almost entirely. This should have been a sign of order, of professionalism, yet it unsettled me. Humans are not machines. We interpret meaning through dialogue and tension, through the friction of differing perspectives. When that friction fades, understanding risks stagnation. The astropathic choir maintained their duties, chanting in muted tones that lacked the psychic resonance recorded in earlier logs. Their eyes remained open during rituals, yet their expressions conveyed neither ecstasy nor tormentally focus. The warp itself remained quiet, no demonic activity, no psychic interference, no storms of emotion. Such absence would ordinarily be celebrated, for the immaterium is a realm of danger and madness. But the silence carried implications we had not anticipated. It suggested not victory but transformation, not eradication of threat but alteration of conditions. The distortion field surrounding the derelict vessel continued its measured expansion, documented through incremental changes in gravitational readings and spatial geometry. The Mechanicus described these phenomena in technical terms: variations in curvature, anomalies in mass distribution, but their explanations lacked emotional content. They spoke of equations and principles, of systems optimizing reality, yet I sensed uncertainty beneath their rhetoric. Knowledge without context is insufficient. Understanding requires interpretation. I returned to the astropath once more, seeking insight into her evolving condition. She greeted me with calm composure, describing the absence of psychic noise as relief, but her words carried an ambiguity that troubled me. Relief from what? From the burdens of connection, from the weight of emotions that define human experience. She could not answer with precision. Her descriptions remained abstract: freedom, clarity, quiet. These concepts are appealing, yet they also signify loss. The Imperium teaches that purpose arises from struggle, that meaning is forged in adversity. If adversity diminishes, what remains of purpose? The question is not heretical in intent, but it challenges assumptions that underpin our civilization. Doctrine provides guidance, yet doctrine does not exempt reality from complexity. The distortion's effects on the derelict vessel grew more pronounced. Teams reported structural changes that defied conventional explanation, new corridors appearing without mechanical intervention, chambers reconfigured according to patterns that mirrored no known engineering principles. These anomalies were documented and analyzed, with the Mechanicus proposing theories of dimensional manipulation and advanced technology. Some celebrated the findings as evidence of superior understanding, validation of doctrines that elevate knowledge above superstition. Others urged caution, emphasizing that comprehension does not guarantee control. I align with the latter perspective. History records civilizations undone by hubris, societies that pursued knowledge beyond their capacity to wield it responsibly. The warp itself exemplifies this cautionary truth. It is partially understood, yet inherently dangerous. This new phenomenon presents a different challenge. It does not corrupt or assault, it recalibrates. Emotional intensity diminishes, communication softens, and systems reliant on psychic infrastructure weaken. The Imperium is vast, but vastness offers no immunity. Stability can become stagnation. Order can devolve into rigidity. I observe these trends with measured concern, recognizing parallels to historical patterns of decline. Empires fall not solely through external conflict but through internal erosion. The distortion's influence mirrors such erosions, subtle, progressive, and difficult to counter. Halbricht continues to enforce operational protocols, emphasizing documentation and disciplined observation. Her leadership remains resolute, though I detect signs of fatigue, recognition of complexity without surrender. She reminds the crew that witnesses bear responsibility, that recording events preserves understanding for future generations. I find merit in her assertion. This record exists to inform, not persuade, to describe phenomena as they occur. If humanity changes, our understanding must evolve accordingly. The fifth day concludes, without decisive developments. Expansion persists, the warp remains quiet, and the fleet adapts. Adaptation may signify survival, but it may also herald transformation beyond recognition. In the vast and uncertain cosmos, certainty is rare. Observation endures. I will continue to record. The sixth day arrived with an air of finality, though no event announced it. No alarms, no sudden crises, no decisive confrontation. The fleet continued its operations with mechanical precision, protocols observed, reports filed, and duties executed. Yet something fundamental had shifted. The emotional tenor of the crew remained subdued, not in despair but in detachment. Conversations were brief and functional, lacking the subtle warmth that once accompanied human interaction. I observed this across departments, from engineering to logistics, and though efficiency remained high, the absence of engagement troubled me. Humans are social creatures, defined by their capacity for connection and meaning. When those elements diminish, civilization risks becoming a system of processes rather than purpose. The astropathic choir maintained their rituals, chanting in hushed tones that conveyed discipline but not psychic resonance. Their connection to the immaterium, once a source of both power and peril, had weakened to the point of near irrelevance. No visions, no demonic interference, no overwhelming psychic sensations. The warp was quiet. This should have been cause for relief, yet the silence carried implications we could not ignore. In the Imperium's doctrine, chaos represents the ultimate threat, an existential enemy born of emotion and excess. Its absence might seem beneficial, but absence itself introduces new questions. What becomes of a civilization whose primary adversary fades? Does it thrive or does it stagnate? The distortion field surrounding the derelict vessel reached its maximum documented extent during this period, encompassing multiple systems and altering spatial measurements in subtle but measurable ways. Gravitational readings shifted, not catastrophically but incrementally, suggesting a redefinition of local physics. The Mechanicus described these phenomena with technical precision: variations in curvature, anomalies in mass distribution, but their explanations remained incomplete. Equations can describe behavior, yet understanding requires interpretation. The difference between data and meaning is profound. I returned to the astropath for what I believed would be a final interview. She greeted me with composure, describing her condition as stable. The absence of psychic noise persisted, but she no longer framed it as relief. Her words reflected acceptance, a recognition that her previous role within the Immaterium had diminished. This admission troubled me. Identity within the Imperium is often defined by function. To lose function is to risk losing purpose. She spoke of quiet clarity, of thoughts unburdened by external intrusion, but I sensed an underlying ambiguity. Clarity without passion can become sterility. Understanding without conviction risks becoming indifference. The Imperium teaches that faith and duty provide structure, that meaning arises from service. If those structures weaken, what remains? This question is not rebellion, but reflection. Chronicler's responsibility is to examine events honestly, even when conclusions challenge assumptions. The derelict vessel continued to transform. Structural analyses revealed additional geometric patterns within its architecture, configurations that defied conventional engineering principles. Corridors reconfigured themselves, not through mechanical movement but through alteration of spatial relationships. Spaces documented on previous surveys no longer existed, replaced by new chambers whose dimensions contradicted external schematics. The Mechanicus interpreted these anomalies as evidence of advanced design, systems operating according to principles beyond human comprehension. They celebrated the findings as validation of their doctrines, yet their enthusiasm lacked certainty. Understanding a phenomenon does not guarantee control over it. History records civilizations undone by hubris, societies that pursued knowledge without considering consequence. The warp's silence remained the most profound development. Psychic activity across affected systems declined, and reports of demonic incursions diminished. At first this seemed triumphal evidence that the distortion neutralized the Immaterium's dangers, but the implications were more complex. The warp is integral to human communication and governance. Astropathic networks depend upon its currents. Psychers derive their abilities from its energy. Remove the Immaterium's influence, and the Imperium's infrastructure weakens. Isolation replaces interconnection. Worlds once bound together by psychic bonds become separate and distant. Halbricht acknowledged these risks in strategic briefings, emphasizing preparation rather than panic. Her leadership remained disciplined, though I detected a subtle shift in tone, a recognition that the situation exceeded conventional categories of threat. This was not war in the traditional sense, it was transformation. The fleet's mission evolved accordingly. Documentation and observation became paramount. Understanding the phenomenon required patience and rigor. Emotional reactions, while natural, could not guide analysis. I recorded these developments with professional detachment, yet I cannot ignore their significance. The sixth day concludes without resolution. Expansion persists. The warp remains quiet, and the Imperium adapts. Adaptation may signify survival, but it may also herald change beyond recognition. Civilizations are defined by their responses to uncertainty. In the grim and vast cosmos, certainty is rare. Knowledge evolves, so must understanding. I will continue to record,